Oh, there's pizza, by the way, and generously provided by Eric, one of our OC members, out of his own pocket, so that's their Venmo.
Hi, everybody. Is this volume good enough? Is there a speaker? Okay. So tonight we have our honored guest, Norman Finkelstein, who's been a trailblazer in this movement that we're also behind. And he graciously accepted to join us tonight. And we're going to use an interview format to kind of go over some things. Is that all right? Sure. Welcome. Thanks for coming out. So we're going to start just as being DSA, we endorsed Bernie for president, and I guess that will be our starting point. So DSA has endorsed Bernie for president. What hope do you think his candidacy offers for the Palestinian cause going forward?
Well, before I talk about the Palestinian cause, I just came back from the future, and I can report back that it works. For those of you who remember that line, who said that? This is very sad. All history is being forgotten. That was the line, the famous line by Lincoln Stephens, who nobody knows.
It's a new generation.
No, it's actually three new generations.
Okay.
Lincoln Stephens was a novelist and muckraker, and he went to the Soviet Union in 1919, and he famously said on his return, "I have seen the future and it works." Alas, it seems he was mistaken, but I am not. I spent 24 glorious hours in Denmark, which, as you know, is one of Bernie's favorite reference points. Though, as the people here told me, strangely enough, Bernie is a far leftist in the United States, but he's dead center in Denmark. And on a less amused note, it really was for me an amazing experience. The more I learned, the more impressed I was. Just a few factoids. So, people pay a minimum of 40% in taxes, and they moan and groan a little, but it's kind of a pro forma moan and groan, because they're very proud of the system they created. Healthcare is free. Education, all education through the university is free. The only thing, oddly enough, that's not free is dental. And dental is as expensive there as it is here. A root canal is $1,500. I was checking on reference points that I'm familiar with. So I was curious what they do, and people tell me everybody goes to Eastern Europe for root canals and for dental. And there is a small movement underway to make the dental free. Everybody rides bicycles. It looks like Amsterdam in that respect. I hate SUVs. It's my current pet peeve. And I was gratified to learn that if you want an SUV or any other oversized imbecilic vehicle, it's a 280% tax. So you don't see them in the street. For those of you who've read Moore's Utopia, the people resemble Moore's Utopia. They dress very drably, even more drab than this audience, which is, a pretty low standard.
Speak for yourself then.
They're said to be, though I had a little interaction with them because I was invited by a Shia Muslim group to to speak, but they're said to be really down to earth, really nice. And it was just, I have to say, I never believed the capitalist system could be so humane. But it really was.
It's nice of you to join us so quickly on landing.
Well, forget about the trip, the landing and the takeoff, but the actual stay there was really quite enlightening. And they make constant reference to Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
Because they're kind of proud of the fact that Denmark is the place he always refers to. Now, it's a small place. It's 6 million people. Copenhagen is 600,000 people. And there are a couple of indices that things aren't perfect there. Divorce rate is 50%.
Suicide rate would be high too.
Family size is only 1.2, which means in de facto terms, Danes are dying out. Soon they said it'll be an elderly society. When you walk in the street, you don't see any children.
And they're also big advocates for Palestine because you've been invited there quite a few times, haven't you?
No, actually, they have a lot of the residual guilt from World War II. So there's a very strong connection between Denmark and Israel, regrettably.
But haven't you been invited there a few times?
Yeah, but it's not representative.
Okay. So do you have thoughts about Bernie's candidacy in relation to Palestine? I mean, in 2016, we heard a presidential candidate talking about Palestine being critical of Israel for what seemed to me the first time. And it seems he's spoken more boldly, as have others. Do you have thoughts about that going into the 2020 election?
There are many things to be said. First of all, the Palestine cause at this moment, for people who want to be honest and not engage in kind of romanticism, it's dead. There was a tragic insight to how dead it was, that the people of Gaza were effectively abandoned and left to their own devices. Not only did they not get any support from the international solidarity movement, they got no support from the West Bank.
You're referring to the Great Return March?
Yeah, the Great March of Return, which continues as we speak. But for many reasons, which only if people want to pursue it, one can understand why it died. But I do believe two things. Number one, if Bernie gets elected, it will be a game changer. It may even, you never can predict these things, obviously, but it may actually inspire the people in the West Bank to give it a last go, because they know now there's a possibility of budging the United States. So I think there's a possibility that it may resurrect the Palestine movement if Bernie gets elected. The second thing is that if Bernie wins, it will set, obviously that's a very big if, but it will set the parameters, the limits of what's possible. Because once you start advocating something beyond what he supports, you're going to lose him, and you'll lose the whole mainstream, which, if he sets the lead, the mainstream, should he win, you can win it. And so you have to, I think, if you want to extract some change, you have to look at what he's saying and what he's likely to say. Incidentally, not just him, but the people ostensibly more radical than him, like Ilhan Omar. And even she, like him, are very firm on nothing past the two-state settlement and preserving the state of Israel. I won't say preserving it as a Jewish state, because in my own view, there is no clear meaning what you mean by a Jewish state. There are innocuous ways of defining a state as Jewish, just as there are innocuous ways of defining Britain as Anglican. But there are also pernicious ways to define Israel as Jewish, just as it's pernicious ways to define South Africa as white. It depends on what content you give that term. And I'm pretty confident that Bernie Sanders' administration will give that term a relatively innocuous content. So it's an opportunity. However, I would want to stress being realistic about the limits of that opportunity. I don't think if you're hoping that you can push Bernie to advocate one state, that to me is pie in the sky. But both Bernie and his more intense version, namely Jeremy Corbyn, one can hope from them to put to change the balance of forces. And if he does it, Bernie comes to power and Corbyn comes to power, it will move Germany. I mean, Germany's just afraid, the Holocaust card. But if the German administration is supported, it can find support from the US and the UK, they too will be moved. And then the game changes. But again, having said that, nothing changes unless the Palestinian people take the lead. It's not going to happen from the top. That's impossible. In my opinion, it's not possible. But I think the Palestinians will think, you know what? Maybe now we have a chance. And so they may do something.
So is it safe to say you think Bernie is the best candidate in terms of Palestine? That's right.
I don't think, when you say the best candidate,
Most favorable.
I would say that he represents a consensus that has a chance to win. That's the maximum you can hope for now. And it was clear with Ilhan Omar, who seemed like a flaming radical, but then when she's in Washington and she takes a measure of the land, she writes an op-ed in the Washington Post and she says, I support 2 states. That's measuring, it's weighing the political forces. It was the same thing if anybody follows these things, and you're all, or almost all of you, are way too young to have followed it. Every Palestinian leadership followed the same route. When Yasser Arafat was invited to the United Nations in 1974, up until then, they supported one unitary democratic secular state, or at least they claimed they did. The moment he's in the UN, he weighs the political forces, he starts advocating 2 states. Hamas was supporting one Islamic state in Palestine. In 2006, it wins the election. It's suddenly now a political player in the international arena, the parliamentary election. And it quietly changed its position and started to advocate 2 states. Every time any political party steps into the real world, or any political person, in this case Ilhan Omar, she quickly realizes this is the only game in town, and if you don't play by those rules, you can be a heroic figure, but you're not going to accomplish anything.
Are you familiar with Congresswoman Betty McCollum's bill?
No way to treat a child.
No way to treat a child.
I've seen, reports about it, but there's so much legislation going on now, mostly negative. that I don't recall particularly the content of hers.
So this is the anti-war working group of DSA, and a major cause of ours is Palestine as well as Yemen. And
As well as
Yemen?
Yemen, yes.
So for the No Way to Treat a Child, Danielle, do you want to speak to what that is?
Yeah, so basically, No Way to Treat a Child, it's a campaign of the organization Defense for Children International in Palestine, and they've been trying to push legislation in Congress. Right now it's only in the House, but to amend the Leahy law to address violations of the human rights of children, to end the U.S. funding for specifically Israeli administrative detention of Palestinian children in the West Bank, and also appropriate funding for monitoring of the human rights of Palestinian children. And they kind of see it as a sort of, I mean, it's the Leahy law, so it's a kind of a sanction. And that's one of the reasons that we were pushing it. We saw it as like a meaningful like S in BDS, even if it's very limited, in light of the political constraints of our time, I suppose.
Yeah, the idea is that it's an entry point, and how can you argue that children should not be incarcerated and taken from their parents and abused? So it has gotten support in New York from Ocasio-Cortez. I don't believe she signed on to the legislation, but she's given vocal support of it, public support of it, and there's other congresspeople in New York considering it. So it has a chance. It was presented before, and it got 30 congresspeople in supporting it. I think, what was it, 2018, 2017?
Yeah, the last session.
Yeah, so it will be reintroduced, and that's, we are trying to put some energy behind that and petition for it across the country and DSA, and hopefully the anti-war working group. But we're trying to be strategic because we don't think it's a dead cause. I mean, we'd like to keep the cause alive, and as activists, just do what we can.
Well, it sounds like, the right piece of legislation. There's a lot of, I don't want to say a lot because that's an exaggeration, but there is useful material out there which regrettably hasn't been used. Most notably, the recent Human Rights Council report on the Great March of Return. It's unusually substantial. It runs to 252 single-spaced pages, which is quite large for a human rights report. A significant part at the beginning is highly legalistic and can be safely ignored. But the middle part is really quite extraordinary because it's the first human rights report, to my knowledge, which focuses on, or I should say documents, because it's not intentionally focusing on. It's the first human rights report which documents extensively, and one might say incontrovertibly, on Israel's deliberate targeting of children, journalists, medical personnel, and disabled people in the Great March of Return. Now, in the laws of war, there's no distinction made between what's called a disproportionate attack, an indiscriminate attack, and an intentional attack on civilians. According to the laws of war, each of those three categories, indiscriminate, disproportionate, and intentional attacks, they all qualify as war crimes. Now, that's what the law says. And any human rights expert, were he or she in the room, would say, we don't have any hierarchy when it comes to war crimes. That is to say, they're all equally egregious. But that's just the theory. The reality is the broad public is much more tolerant of indiscriminate and disproportionate attacks on the one hand, and the intentional targeting of civilians on the other. Because the assumption among the broad public, which is not obviously without foundation, is, well, war is hell, there's the fog of war, disproportionate attacks, indiscriminate attacks, they're inevitable. However, for the broad public, the deliberate targeting of civilians, that crosses a red line. Now, the human rights organizations, ever since they started to honestly monitor the Israel-Palestine conflict, and that began roughly in the late 1980s with the first Intifada, that's the first time the human rights organizations began to more or less honestly monitor the Israel-Palestine conflict. They've always, the limit they will go has always been to charge Israel with indiscriminate and disproportionate attacks. They will occasionally say this or that individual was intentionally targeted by Israel. That's always been the red line, that intentional targeting. This is the first report which documents to the point that your innards start to writhe and shred this systematic targeting. Actually, if you allow me, because I wasn't sure what the format was, so I had brought along some notes. Obviously, for reasons of time, I couldn't possibly go through all of it, but
Can you tell us what the date is for this report?
this report came out about 4 months ago,
So in 2019, early,
2019, if my memory is right.
and it's Human Rights Council?
It's the Human Rights Council report, and as I said, on the one hand, it's very professional, learned, and objective. But then, when it comes to this chronicling of what's been going on there, it was just astonishing. So I'll just arbitrarily, just to show I'm being arbitrary, I'll just ask Karen to just choose one from the first page. And we'll just do arbitrary. Okay, so Ali Kafarja was a university student. ISF soldiers shot him in the head with live ammunition. Ali was talking on his phone while standing in the crowd about 150 meters from the separation fence when he was shot. He died at a hospital. Choose one from this page. Okay. Abid Abdullah Al-Katouri was a 22-year-old volunteer paramedic. ISF soldiers shot him in the chest in Rafah as he was tending to an injured demonstrator near the separation fence. Abdullah was wearing a white paramedic jacket and carrying a red first aid kit when the ISF soldier shot him. He died of bleeding and lacerations to his thoracic organs. Choose just two more, just arbitrarily. Okay. The ISF shot 30-year-old journalist Yasser Murtaja with live ammunition in the lower abdomen as he covered the demonstration site. Yasser was wearing a dark blue bulletproof vest clearly marked with the word press and a blue helmet. He was standing approximately 300 meters from the separation fence behind a large group of demonstrators. Visibility was good, and there were no other shots fired in the vicinity at the time. The gunshot hit him in the abdomen, and he died of his injuries the following morning. Well, it goes on and on and on and on. They're targeting 11-year-old kids. They're targeting double amputees. They're targeting people on crutches. It was just unbelievable to be reading it. Not because I was surprised. Anybody who's followed the human rights reporting as I have, you would know it. But it was very surprising to see it documented. And then the question was, well, there were twofold questions. Number one, why hadn't it been documented before in such a graphic way? And there I think there's a double reason. Number one, obviously, to say things like this casts Israel in a very different light when you talk about disproportionate and indiscriminate attacks. The second thing is, even people on what's called the left, there's like this constitutional incapacity to believe that Israel does things like this. And in large part, it's because it's very hard, I'm speaking now as a Jewish person, for a Jew to imagine Jews doing these things. There's something like when you think of a Jew, you think about maybe a Woody Allen, maybe a Franz Kafka, maybe an Einstein, or a Yasha Heifetz. You don't think about child killers. It's just a very hard thing to reconcile in your mind. By the way, the people who are doing it, these are Israel's top snipers. They were specifically specially trained snipers in order to ensure, this is Israel speaking, accurate and measured use of live ammunition. Israel itself never claimed that these were bad apples or exceptions to the rule. They said nothing was carried out uncontrolled. Everything was accurate and measured, and we know where every bullet landed. Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman, he said that, quote, Israeli soldiers did what was necessary. I think all of our soldiers deserve a medal. And in fact, that is how they carry on. There was nothing aberrant except for the fact that a human rights organization, for the first time, documented it and didn't shy away from the reality of what was going on. And one of the things that, and here I'm not trying to be facetious, I'm actually being very serious, you have trouble believing that Jews do something like this, but Israel does do that. And there was an interesting article by probably the world's leading authority on fascism, a fellow from Israel named Zev Sternhauer. He's a very reputable, serious scholar. He has this apologetic side when it comes to Israel, but he also can be very tough. And he recently pondered the question, why is it that Israel feels so comfortable with all of these ultra-rightists in Eastern Europe, for whom anti-Semitism is part of their stock in trade? In Hungary, in Poland. Why does Israel feel so much at ease? But there's also the reverse side. They all love Israel. Why do they all love Israel? And it was very interesting, Sternhauer's response. He said because for the people of Eastern Europe and the other alt-right countries like Bolsonaro in Brazil, he said Israel is not Jewish. They don't see Israel as Jewish. They see Israel as a white supremacist, far-right regime like themselves. And actually, I think that's right. I don't think Israel, I'm not trying to be facetious, I'm not trying to be purposely provocative. I don't think Israel is Jewish. There's nothing really about it that is Jewish. It's a wholly alien entity. Yes, there are aspects, the religion at some superficial level. And certainly there are certain aspects of Judaism and Jewish tradition, the sense of superiority and so forth, which makes itself felt in Israel in very ugly ways. But it's not Jewish. And that's one of the things, I think, one of the reasons why people have so much trouble making sense. I don't mean I'm talking about the left too. Joint Operation Protective Edge in 2014. So there was one famous, there were many horrendous things that happened there, but some of you will remember one incident. That's the human rights language, incident, but I have to use it. There was one incident where Israel kills 4 children playing hide and seek on the wharf in Gaza. Now, this was not a very complicated case. There are 4 kids. They were playing hide and seek. It was, a lot of people thought it was soccer, but it was hide and seek. They're playing it around an old, dilapidated fisherman's hut. So, it happened to be they were playing right in front of the main international hotel for journalists. So there were all these journalists out there. They all observed the incident. They said there were no Hamas militants around. This was not, Israel claimed it was a Hamas naval center, blah, 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 blah. I said, no, that's ridiculous. It was just a fisherman's hut. And they just sent out 2 drones and killed one, and then as the 3 others were fleeing, killed the 3 other kids who were aged around 10 years old. And nobody would believe Israel did that intentionally. Now when I say no one, for those of you who follow these things, go back and look at The Intercept. So last year, The Intercept has one of its scoops, big stories, that the kids were killed. It was a botched up operation. It was a mistake. And how do they know it's a mistake? Because The Intercept obtained a transcript of a judicial court where the soldiers who were responsible said it was a botched up operation. Well, that's very compelling evidence. But even The Intercept, they can kind of assimilate that Israel does these things routinely. It doesn't just incarcerate kids. It tortures them. And that's not news. The first report put out by a human rights organization documenting Israeli torture, because that was another red line. You can accuse Israel of abusing prisoners, you can accuse Israel of ill-treating prisoners, but you could never use the T word. You could never use the torture word. Even Amnesty in the 1980s, the decade of the 80s, Amnesty had an international campaign to abolish torture. And it put out a report, it was called Torture in the 80s. Even Amnesty would not say Israel was practicing torture. Finally, that red line was crossed when B'Tselem, the Israeli human rights organization, had put out a report. And the title of the report was Ill-Treatment, Torture, Abuse, the treatment of Palestinian minors, M-I-N-O-R-S, minors in Israeli detention. The very first report was about the very first report on torture, which documented it was pretty amazing. It was like, of the 18 cases they studied, 17 of the people had been tortured. But there have been routinely torturing Palestinian kids for decades. You can't say That was 1990. It was the very first
time.
report.
Could I get a time check? How much time do we have?
About 30 minutes.
Okay, so just so you know, in terms of what we want to cover, speaking of the crimes, we can assimilate what you're talking about.
No, I
now.
think a lot of people, even I, to this day, I read it, and I can't believe it.
Yeah.
I just find it so, it's just, it is so contrary to everything you internalize being Jewish. And I remember my late mother used to say, my late mother was given to conspiracy. She had conspiratorial bent, no question about it. She was very smart, and like every broken clock, she could be right twice a day. And she used to say, she was from Eastern Europe, came from a pious Jewish home, ended up a Stalinist, but that's another story. She used to say, they're not Jews, Israel. They're all CIA agents. That's, of course, a certain element of hyperbole there. But there is a basic truth there, which for the first time I was forced to think about when Sternhell made that comment. He says they all love Israel because for them Israel's not Jewish. I mean, I think there's a deep truth there in what he's saying. I want to just say one other thing. How did it come to pass that they did this? Why did these three commissioners on this commission of inquiry, they documented and nobody else did before them?
1990?
No, the Human Rights Council.
This year.
Yeah, the intentional, the deliberate targeting of children. And not just children, journalists, disabled people, and medical personnel. It's an interesting question because it tells you about a real opportunity that was squandered. Israel always claimed in the past, we're not targeting civilians. Hamas is using them as human shields. Hamas is firing rockets from the midst of civilians. They always had those arguments. This was the first time, because the Great March of Return was overwhelmingly nonviolent, you couldn't use those pretexts anymore. They didn't have that alibi. It was masses of people being videotaped in broad daylight. You have the camera fixed on a person in crutches, sitting under a tree, getting shot. You have a double amputee, nobody surrounding him, getting shot. You couldn't use the threadbare lies of the past. And so here was, to my thinking, a huge opportunity for us, the Solidarity movement, because now you had irrefutable, incontrovertible evidence that Israel is targeting civilians for death. And it was squandered. Nobody even read the report. Yeah. It's a real, in my opinion, it's a real tragedy. But you had a real opportunity to go after Israel with this report. That's a lie? Well, they watched the videos. There were no Hamas, nobody even claims there were Hamas militants firing rockets in the middle of the Great March of Return. Incidentally, the report said we saw no evidence of grenades being used. Israel and those pigs in the Times, Halfinger and Kirchner, reporting grenades. There were no grenades used. There were no IUDs. There was nothing. There was nothing. Yeah, some of the kids, they tried to rip off the barbed wire. But they said in the whole period they chronicled, the Great March of Return began March 30th. and they chronicled it until December 31st. In that whole period, they came to 2 incidents where there may have been a weapon in the crowd. One where somebody apparently just fired a rifle arbitrarily, and another one where somebody shot a drone. That was it. That's it. Otherwise, they said there wasn't a single incident apart from those 2 where the Israeli soldiers ever faced an imminent threat to their life. It just didn't happen. You know, there was a lot there, and I think that opportunity was lost.
I think there's still a chance. You had some thinking on the ICC and that there might be a possibility of going that route to have some accountability for Israel. Did you want to talk about that at all?
I'll just talk briefly. There have now been 2 referrals, as they're called, to the International Criminal Court. One of them was over the Mavi Marmara, who some of you might remember. It was the humanitarian vessel or flotilla that went to Gaza in May 31st, 2010, and came under Israeli attack. At the end, 10 passengers were killed. That incident, as it's called, I have to use the language, is now before the International Criminal Court. And then in last year or 2 years ago, I can't even remember now, the state of Palestine, because it had official status now, it filed another referral to the International Criminal Court, this time pertaining to the illegal settlements under the Rome Statute of the Criminal Court. Settlements are war crimes. And also Operation Protective Edge and the Great March of Return. They're all part of the second referral. The current the current chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, or as some people like to call it, correctly in my opinion, the International Caucasian Court. So far, the chief prosecutor is a Gambian judge named Fatou Bensouda. And Fatou Bensouda is totally terrified of indicting Israel because she's afraid that she'll be Goldstone. For those of you who remember the South African jurist who, after Operation Cast Lead, wrote a very damning indictment of Israeli conduct. He then came under attack by Israel and its allies. It seems, you can't prove it, but it seems like they found dirt on him or a member of his family. And he eventually had to recant the report that he wrote, and his whole career was destroyed. And after that, everybody in the human rights community got very nervous. Because we all have skeletons in our closets, including you. And you. And the Mossad is quite efficient at finding that. Anybody would be able to find it because everybody's now being watched, except me because I'm the last holdout. I don't own a cell phone. So everybody knows where you folks are, but nobody knows where I am. And so the chief prosecutor has been doing everything in her power to kill the cases before her, the referrals. But surprisingly, there's been a lot of pushback within the ICC. A lot of people don't like what she's doing. And she keeps saying, this particular case in the Mavi Marmara has been going on since 2013. And it's already now a staff of back and forth. And Bensouda keeps saying, case closed. And then somebody comes back and says, nope, not so fast. And so it's still open. And I think there's a realistic possibility that she may be forced to investigate Israel. We're not even at the point of indictment. But it's very tough now because John Bolton and Pompeo have both said, literally, I'm not using my language, if you indict us, meaning the US, or Israel, we're going to destroy the ICC. They said they already have started. You may know that Bensouda decided to stand firm and indict and proceed with an investigation of US war crimes in Afghanistan. The moment she said we're going to pursue the investigation, the US canceled her visa. And then the court, what's called the chamber, the pretrial chamber, reversed Bensouda and killed the case against the United States. And when people ask, why did they do it? Why did they kill the case? It's just not complicated. You know this t-shirt, I love New York? Well, the judges love New York. And now they were told, you indict Israel, we're canceling the visa. And so Bensouda got her visa canceled. The pretrial chamber got nervous, and so they killed the case. She still can come. And so people, I know a lot of folks in that milieu, and they're trying to figure out what Bensouda will do, because she wants to come to New York. That's where the fun is. The Big Apple. Well, it's true.
And there might be other punishments that are included that we don't see, besides not being able to come to New York.
You may think that's not a big punishment, but when you're in that circuit, the UN circuit,
It's like being in exile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like being exiled.
Do you think there's any sort of pressure, like activist community can apply to get more attention to this?
I think it's a worthwhile endeavor for the following reason. Because if she tries to investigate Israel, the U.S. said that they're going to do, they said, we're going to cancel all visas for the whole ICC. And they said, don't ask me how, but they said they're going to take them to court. It's probably the craziness. So, if they did proceed with a investigation, it would create a diplomatic flap, which would be good, just bringing attention. I've written something very long. It's 70 pages, single-spaced, proving that Bensouda is a liar. I think it's pretty convincing, but it's kind of boring. I can't get anybody to read it.
Where do you want to publish it?
I'm hoping, I took volunteers on my website for proofreaders, for fact checkers, because I don't want there to be a single error there. And I got 40 volunteers. So little do they know what they're in for. They're bored to tears and cursing me till the end of time. But I'm going to try to get it every error teased out, and then in beginning of September 1st. It's called, I hope you'll get the title, Your Generation is So Painful to Deal with, J'accuse.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, good luck with that. Okay, just the last question, and then I think we should open it up to people here, is that there are growing calls for cuts in U.S. military aid to Israel, particularly in light of Israeli violations of Palestinian rights, as we discussed. So we're seeing more prominent politicians speak out about that. And do you have thoughts to give them?
Listen, I listen closely. I'm a good listener. I thought what you said earlier was right. You said we're going to do focusing on the bill with the children, because how can you object to that? Of course, they'll object. But I have come to realize in politics that you really do have to go for the line of least resistance. And there's a tendency among parts of what's called the left to try to cast heroic poses by going after the line of most resistance, this kind of divine isolation. The more you're despised, the more you're hated, and the more successful in your mind you are. And so I always think it's advisable, first of all, to see where the mainstream organizations are, the furthest to the so-called left, where they are, and they have called many times, they called for Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, they have called for a ban on all weapons transfers to Israel and the Palestinians. In the case of the Palestinians, that's totally meaningless because all they have are firecrackers and bottle rockets. But so that seems to me it's within the range of mainstream, the weapons ban. I personally think the most important thing now is to end that brutal, inhuman siege of Gaza. And I don't think it's a tough case. I don't believe it's a tough case. First of all, you have every single human rights organization and humanitarian institution, every single one, bar none, saying that blockade is illegal. Whether it's the International Committee of the Red Cross, I mean, for God's sake, even Ban Ki-moon, that corpse, said it. The UN Security Council, of course the human rights organizations, that the blockade is illegal under international law because it constitutes a form of collective punishment. All of the Human Rights Council report called for the end of the blockade with immediate effect. The report before that, one put out by an American jurist, Mary McDowell Davis, a New York State judge, she said a blockade has to be lifted immediately and unconditionally. So you have a whole lot of public opinion supporting it, and it would make a very big difference for a martyr people if you can get that blockade lifted. I mean, I think that's the demand that should be put on Bernie, and it should be put on AOC. I do believe that all of these debates about focusing on one state or two states, Zionism, they're so completely beside the point. Why not focus on something practical that's actually winnable, like ending the blockade? I really wish, I think the world of Ilhan Omar, if you have a pulpit like that, why not focus on the blockade? You have so much evidence to draw on. You don't have to get out involved in all these arguments about Zionism, which are so pointless and meaningless and meandering.
Still, she's done a pretty good job.
She's been great.
Yeah.
But I just wish there was a concerted focus on a demand that's winnable and that can really affect in very profound ways the lives of a martyred people.
Can we open it up to questions? Thank you.
There just water. If you don't mind, that was absolutely delicious. I totally misled them in Denmark because they bought me a beautiful smoothie and it cost $7 or $8. And they asked me how much would it cost in the U.S. I said $3.50. Now I just bought this and it was $7. So I'm going to have to go back now.
So do you want to keep or should I?
I can just speak up.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. And I agree with you on that notion of that we have to have winnable demand and we have to educate. But I think that your emphasis, I have a different emphasis. And I think, first of all, it's not going to change until until Trump and those people are out. End of discussion. End of discussion. Second of all, our demands won't be met until we organize the unorganized, until we go into Bernie's campaign or go somewhere, and it can't be looked from what the Congress people are doing, what the yes, we could use the Human Rights Committee for their information, but the only way we're ever going to win is to build a mass movement. And I think that the way to do it, I have a lot of ideas about that. Do you have any ideas about how somebody at this point, suppose we come to the conclusion that we have to put all our work into getting Bernie elected. And I think I've come to that conclusion, personally. Then how do you integrate, how do you organize on the Palestinian issue in that context? What do? Do you put demands on Bernie? I'm not necessarily think that you should. Not necessarily. I do believe that we go in there on a grassroots level, and we try to, one, build organization like DSA, and two, we try to educate people as much as possible on those minimum demands that people understand, like human rights violations. We don't have to talk to people about, like, the things that you said. So I think in general, we're completely in agreement, although I have a little emphasis, different emphasis than your talk. So my question then becomes, and maybe other people have ideas about this, about how do we actually enter that campaign, enter the discourse, organize people that we can really win if we defeat Trump?
Well, I don't think there's any difference of opinion between us. You can put demands on Bernie. I very much doubt his wife can put demands on him. You know, he's been around a long time and has a very clear sense of what he's going to do and he's not going to do. I think it's just a question of a focused message. Do we want Bernie, to the extent that he speaks on the issue, do we want him to focus on one state versus two states, or do we want him to focus, to the extent that we can influence it, about a winnable demand like, can you take a stand? There are people non-violently demonstrating in Gaza. Many people have lost their lives. Can you take a stand along with the International Committee of the Red Cross, along with the UN Security Council? Can you take a stand to say, I think that blockade of Gaza has to be lifted, full stop. No conditions, no qualifications. The blockade has to be lifted. He has said a couple of things along those lines in the past, but I think to focus it. And that's all. But I will say, and I'm not trying to be mean-spirited or score points. I'm just trying to look at the situation objectively and factually. If you look at websites, which I occasionally follow, I don't follow them religiously, but you look at a website like Mondo Weiss, about 90% is focused on Zionism or one state versus two states. I would say there may be one item out of, you can disagree with me and I could be off, but I would say there's about one item out of between 50 and 100 that's in the Great March of Return. But there's something really off about that. Do you want to win something practical that can actually change people's lives for the better? That to me is, it's just an incongruity, and it causes me to wonder why. Why are people focused? There are people who are going out every day and getting murdered to try to end that blockade. Why aren't we focusing on it? They're not marching about Zionism. They're not marching about one state or two states. They're marching to end the blockade. Why aren't we focusing on that? And the only other thing is, I was listening to, along the lines of what you said, I think Bernie, I was listening to the statement he made, was it yesterday at the California meeting? And he said there's only one way we're going to defeat Trump. How many people saw this? Nobody. Only one way we're going to defeat Trump. He says you have to get the young people and the working people to believe in politics again, and that they can actually affect their lives. If you can't get them into the political process, Trump's going to win. And I think that was absolutely realistic and absolutely correct. You have to get at least 20, okay, let's call it 10 to 15% of that 50% that never vote in the presidential election. You got to get them out to vote. You got to mobilize and organize the unorganized and the disaffected and the indifferent. And that struck me as correct. And I think we can be part of that, but raising demands which are relevant, realistic, and important.
Thanks. Are there more questions?
Yes.
Hi. Yes, thank you so much. I'm kind of a visitor to this group, but I really appreciate what you're saying. My question partly is, we are living in a time where the forces against communal life, anything that smacks of the big-ass socialism, is being undermined. First it's being brought out into the open, then it's being deliberately said to be cancer that's growing by these forces that Trump supports. Now, I feel like between that and the fact that the Congress of the United States, this august body supposedly, isn't being respected by Trump by not having any of these people who are his allies come in front of it, between that and the way they can work together so symbiotically, if you will, the Israeli government and the US government, how do you have faith that the same attitude, we don't need to listen to Human Rights Watch, we don't need to listen to this commission, we're not, the blockade, it's a better form of kind of a bulwark against terrorism by making terrorism look darker skinned and not Ashkenazi. It's all about the Arabs. We're already so poisoned. Do you see what I mean? I mean, my question is, where does that faith in you thinking that can be realized, this idea?
Well, the faith is very simple, because things have happened in this country in the last 4 years which I never thought would be possible. The Bernie Sanders candidacy, well, actually, the Bernie Sanders candidacy shocked none other than Bernie Sanders. He thought it was just going to be a Tolkien candidacy. And then all sorts of things were happening in our country which I didn't think was possible. Let's start with the most basic thing. I thought the young people were completely hopeless. They were hooked on Facebook and on antidepressants. As a professor, and I meet these people, I couldn't believe what happened in 2016. I had never in my life, in a colorful life, I had never seen such serious, committed, intelligent young people as I witnessed during the Bernie Sanders campaign. I was traveling on buses out of town. In my day, we went to an anti-war rally in Washington. On the way home, everybody's passing around joints. And most of the talk was not about politics. I'm going to be honest about it. It was not. When I went with these cross-state organizing with these young people, it's deadly serious. Deadly serious. Nobody talked politics. There were no drugs. There was no, I'm not saying positively or negatively, I'm just speaking factually. There was no sex going on, come-ons. It wasn't. I mean, that's why the whole thing about the Bernie bros was so stupid. First of all, most of the people on the bus were women. It was around 60% women. It wasn't guys. It's just not true. And it was deadly serious. That made me very, very hopeful. I had not experienced that even during the heyday of the anti-war movement. No, I did not. Now, the civil rights movement in the South you could see it was deadly serious. I mean, the freedom marches, that was, a very high level of moral commitment. Mine was lower. It was the anti-war movement, college students, and the counterculture intersected with the politics. So it was a mixed thing. That made me very hopeful. Then, who would have ever thought in the United States, on mainstream television, media, a person would be going out and denouncing the 1% and saying that a handful of people control all the wealth. And not only saying it, but naming them, naming the Walton family, naming Goldman Sachs. I thought, this is America? I couldn't believe it.
Socialism, we never heard of it for 40 years.
Socialism. I mean, the funny thing about the Bernie candidacy is the only one who really cares about the label of democratic socialism is him. Everybody else, they were just very issues-oriented. They liked his message. Universal health care, abolition or reduction of student debt, free higher education. Those issues resonated. And it's a very interesting thing with Bernie, because he did it the way it has to be done. He used to have, I don't know how many of you are familiar, but they discovered these old tapes of Bernie having these town hall meetings, like in the 1980s in Vermont. And they said that he was constantly adjusting and testing his message. It wasn't like he pulled it out of a hat, a rabbit. He was testing it. What works? What resonates? What wins people over? What loses them? And then he finally refined the message. Now, I'm not trying to toot my own horn. I'm just trying to speak objectively and factually. That's how I eventually, I think, became quite successful in large audiences in the Israel-Palestine conflict. Because I was, for a period of time, I was speaking a lot. I was speaking twice, 3, 4 times a week. And I was constantly testing the message. What works? What wins people? What loses people? And then finally, after many years, I started to see that this focus on international law, focus on human rights supports, things like that, that they won the audience. As Chairman Mao used to say, the goal of politics, unite the many to defeat the few. How do you isolate the other side? How do you win over? And you test it, and you test it, and you test it. Because that's the only way. You have to go before real people and test your message. And then Bernie got it down. Now it's true, he won't let go. Somebody said the other day, the joke with Bernie Sanders is he starts the speech, for those who know him from the 70s and 80s, he starts the speech and then we finish it. Because everyone knows what the speech is going to be. But it works. It works. And like you said, things are now being said in our country which were unthinkable. By the way, most unthinkable on the Israel-Palestine conflict. When Ilhan Omar started to say there's a lobby that's, paying people off, who would ever have believed that the New York Times said she was right? The New York Times runs this large article that says, yeah, it's true. They're being paid off. Who would have ever thought that? It's an interesting fact, by the way, that right now, on the Israel-Palestine conflict, the U.S. is more open than the U.K. If Ilhan Omar was in the Labour Party, for the things she's been saying, she would have been expelled. People have been expelled for less in the Labour Party in the last few months than for what Ilhan Omar. In fact, everybody who supported Ilhan Omar would have been expelled in the Labour Party for saying that the lobby is manipulating U.S. foreign policy, that's considered, in the Liberation Labor Party, you're not allowed to say that anymore. You know, literally, you're not allowed to say it. And so, far from being pessimistic, we've never been more open in the U.S. in terms of what's legitimate. Now, it's true, a large part of it is owing to Ilhan Omar, but it's also true that Ilhan Omar was able to say it because public opinion had shifted so radically, especially in the youth base of the Democratic Party and the liberal part of the Democratic Party. So it's a very hopeful time. It's also a very dangerous time, obviously. You know, it's, it used to be a cliche in my era, the Chinese character for crisis is also the Chinese character for opportunity. There's a serious crisis, and there's also a very big opportunity. I think there's a reasonable chance, no certainty, there's a reasonable chance that Bernie can win. So that would be really, it's a nice way to end your life.
I think we've ignored Rashida Tlaib. Is that his name? I think we've ignored her, and she's been quite active on that front and is planning a tour to Palestine, I think this summer. It's going to happen with Congress people. Are there any other questions? And I think we're out of time. Okay, well, thank you, Norman, so much for coming to speak.